like to be beside the seaside. I do like to be beside the sea. I do like to stroll along the prom when the brass band plays till the om. So just let me be beside the seaside. I'll be beside Miss Elle with glee. And there's lots of girls beside. I should like to be beside the seaside, beside the sea.
As we're driving up here anyway, describe the scene you said yourself just a moment ago.
Yes, just pre-war and in fact after the war, this street during the summer months would be teeming with holidaymakers because this is the main road of the town that leads down to the pier and the beaches.
It wouldn't have been a one-way system in those days?
Oh no, two-way system in those days. In fact, this is all new and very controversial, all this one-way system.
What they're building here on the right used to be the old Marine public house, and they're now building a block of offices and shops, but it was the headquarters of the Home Guard during the war, who used to carry on after the pub had closed and go into one of the bars and discuss tactics, as you can imagine.
And Barclays Bank just there was bombed during the war, and they moved the business over the road here to this shop. And so they did all the banking from there for a while until they repaired it, and then they went back there. But we lost the old town clock, but it's since been replaced by a modern clock, which nobody thinks looks so nice.
It was in fact the town hall, wasn't it? The Clacton town hall. Now Barclays Bank. I had the clock on top, the old town clock.
Post office we've just passed on the right was that was the post office put up in 1924, brand new building then of course, and before that it was on the site now occupied by W.H. Smith and Sons in Pier Avenue.
And this particular road we're driving down now is full of boarding houses, guest houses, etc. Now mainly taken over as bedsits and flatlets, but just prior to the war.
Coming up on the left you've got the old Lifeboat House pub, which in fact was the old lifeboat station. Just there.
And the horses used to drag the lifeboat down a gap in the cliffs there that was called Eagle Gap, and that's how they used to launch the lifeboat, from that place there, down the road, down through this gap in the cliffs, and then into the sea. And the lads used to row it out from there.
That must have been a job putting it back up again.
Yeah, that's right, that's why the horses had to stand by again.
But the locals used to help, of course. The locals used to wait there just to do that, help it back up.
On the right here is coming up the Osborne Hotel, which used to be the Osborne House. One of the oldest houses in this, which was Rosemary Lane. It's now Rosemary Road, but it was Rosemary Lane, and that was one of the original hotels houses.
That was one of the first ones?
That's right. And here on the right-hand side now, a bingo hall, is the Savoy Theatre. Reg and I know that very well because we appeared there in 1959 for a summer season, but just prior to that, Reg, it was even more famous, wasn't it?
Yeah, but in the 1890s, when it was part of the town hall buildings, it was known as the old Operetta House, and then it became, and I think it was in 1911, the Tivoli Cinema, and then it was run into disuse in the 40s after the war. And then in 1951 it was turned into a theatre, the Savoy Theatre, as Bob said, which started off with plays and things. At one time it had a nude show there, I remember. And
a nude show in Clacton?
A nude show in Clacton, would you
Paul
believe?
Raymond put it on, yes. And the two ladies who were the nudes at the time were known as...
I don't know their names, but you didn't have to know their names, you could recognise them by their figures.
Nicknames, but perhaps we've got to not mention that here.
One was big and one was small, you see.
On the right you've got what is now Marshall's Amusements, was of course the Brunswick Hotel, and next to it was the big ice cream bar run by the Mazzolinis. And it was a really big ice cream bar.
And where we are now, if it was in Blackpool, it would be called the Golden Mile. It's actually, of course, the Golden about 200 yards, but this is where all the amusements are and the seaside, what they used to call the seaside catch pennies. But just on the left is an interesting little kiosk there, which you see is Quality Seafoods, and that's run by the famous Tubby Isaacs of Aldgate.
Yes. And straight ahead, down that gap, is number 1 North Sea, or Clacton Pier, and very famous throughout the ages.
You used to get quite a few famous names coming to Clacton as well. You yourselves, Reg and Bob, were in entertainment. You've already described the Savoy.
That's right.
But what are some of the names that you played with?
Max Miller, Engelbert Humperdinck.
But he wasn't Engelbert Humperdinck then. He was a young singer known as Jerry Dorsey, trying to find a niche for himself in entertainment. But a little later on, he got a good manager who turned him into Engelbert Humperdinck, and the world knows the rest of what happened from there.
And of course the Billy Cotton Band Show played here at the Savoy Theatre many times, and they were very famous in their days, used to fill the theatre, I remember, but also used to fill all the dressing rooms, so Reg and I had to make arrangements elsewhere for dressing.
Martin will tell you about the Grand Hotel now, which is just coming up on the left.
Yes. The original big hotel of Clacton was then taken over as a teachers' college later on, and teacher training took place there, as in fact did the hotels all along here.
Towers here.
They took over the towers, and the big new library then of course was just part of the Towers Hotel.
And this Alton Hall, now in flats, used to be a temperance hotel in the town, and the only thing about this temperance hotel was that the manager at the time was always drunk. He was quite a famous chap.
When we come up to it is Crossley House, and it was the home of, I think it's General Booth's wife, was it, died here, or mother? Wife, wasn't it? That's Crossley House there. His wife lived and died there on Clacton seafront.
And this old house on the left, which is being done up here, renovated, was taken down from, I think it was Suffolk, Reg, wasn't it?
Somewhere near Suffolk.
Brick by brick, and transported to Clacton and erected on the seafront here.
Oh, really? Got a helicopter out. You've been mentioning some of the places around, the Palace Theatre, the Westcliff Theatre, sports facilities at the hotels and things, the Butlins, which used to be, which is now completely locked up. What are your own feelings, especially as you, Reg, and you, Bob, were actually in the entertainment industry yourselves, part of your lives?
Well, we came, in 1959 we did a summer season at the Savoy Theatre, which is now a bingo hall, and at that time Clacton was really swinging as a holiday town. There was lots and lots of entertainment in the town of all sorts, lots of sport, lots of celebrities for Sunday concerts, and it was really, I think, 1959, 1960, the end of the era, really, of entertainment in the town. We had all the famous stars, celebrities used to visit to do this, that and the other, Sunday concerts, as I say, with famous stars, and weekly variety at the Savoy Theatre, the Ocean Theatre, which is on Clacton Pier, which you can just see, was very famous as a review, a summer review, and that was one of the brightest and biggest holiday shows on the coast.
In fact, in the Ocean Review, it had such stars as Dick Emery, Roy Hudd, and perhaps the most famous of them all, the talented but unfortunately tragic Tony Hancock.
Just here on the right hand side, this is King's Avenue, Holland-on-Sea. It's now a block of flats, but it used to be the Queen's Hall Theatre, which was a theatre which seated no more than 380 people, and was in fact, I believe, erected by a local builder, Reg Johnson.
A chap named Johnson, yes, and there was a lot of amateur plays and productions in the winter and autumn, but in the summer months they had a little professional concert party. Clacton was a great place for concert parties. The entertainment scene in Clacton started as concert parties on the beach round about the early 1900s, and there was Bruin's concert party. We had the White Coons and those sort of people strumming away on the seafront, and of course the famous song is "We Do Like to Be Beside the Seaside," included in all the repertoires.
Stanley Holloway started with Will Pepper's White Coons, I believe, on the beach, and then transferred to the Westcliff Theatre, which we'll see later on.
Here's the famous Roaring Donkey pub, which used to be known as the Princess Helena, but it's now the Roaring Donkey. I don't quite know how it got a name like Roaring Donkey. Nobody seems to know. It's buried in the midst of, in between the wars sometimes, but strange name for a public house, Roaring Donkey.
because everybody was evacuated from Clacton. Just about a year after the war, I think. They sent everybody to Clacton at the beginning, decided it wasn't safe and sent them all out again. But it did become relatively a ghost town, and Butlin's holiday camp was used by the army, and also later it was used for prisoners of war, housing prisoners of war. But the whole town was full of troops, and in fact just prior to D-Day, if you'd have come through any of these streets, it was lined right along the street with vehicles of all types, light Bren gun carriers, etc., all having the stars painted on the roofs so that they would be easily recognisable when they got over the other side of the channel.
Coming up on our left very shortly, we have the site where the first civilians of the war were killed, in fact of the whole war. And we're just coming along when an aircraft crashed with still an unexploded mine on board. We're just coming to the site now. It's a Victoria Road site, and to this day they're still having trouble with the properties built on the site for subsidence. They're still working on them now.
Yes, it was much publicised at the time because, as Martin says, it was the first casualties of the war. And this is Victoria Road just here on the left, and it was on the right hand side just down that road where this Heinkel crashed. And of course the site's now been built on again, but it had a lot of press coverage at the time and was the subject of radio broadcasts because that was the first time civilian casualties had been encountered during the war.
Some of the people who went there to work and clear the thing, they were sitting on what they thought was a cylinder, a hot water cylinder. Turned out to be an unexploded mine, so when they were told that, they got off pretty quick.
Reg, what's that building over there then?
This building is now the new telephone exchange. At one time it was Asham College, one of the many private schools that were in Clacton between the wars. Great place for convalescent home and private schools, Clacton. Asham College, of course, is famous because Vivian Woodward, who played for Chelsea and England, was educated there. Clacton College. So it's another one of those highfalutin names that they gave these places. They were really just private schools. Most of these houses, one or two of these houses along here were private.
Just past on the right, the Shakespeare Hotel, what used to be the Shakespeare Hotel, which I think is one of the oldest hotels in Clacton, and now used, or used to be used until recently, as an old people's home. Now closed up, I think, because of the fire regulations.
On the right, Clacton Town Hall, built in 1931 and opened then by the Duke of Connaught, who has many connections in this area. Duke of Connaught, there's Connaught Avenue in Frinton-on-Sea, and there's Connaught Rooms in the Town Hall. These commemorate the visits of the Duke of Connaught in 1931 when he opened then the new Town Hall. Nowadays, of course, we have two live theatres left in the town. We have the Princess Theatre, which is part of the Town Hall complex, and the Westcliff Theatre. At one time we had the Ocean Theatre, the Westcliff Theatre, the Princess Theatre, the Queen's Hall at Holland-on-Sea. We had the theatres, the open-air theatre on the pier, the Ramblers Concert Party. We had another open-air theatre down at Jaywick.
Over on our left we have a site of one of our one-time mini cinemas, the Kiddermile Grand, which is now Fad's Do-It-Yourself, and on the right we have a row of new shops so far unoccupied. The Odeon Theatre stood on this site.
Is there a cinema in Clacton now?
Yes, that's the cinema we have. We have one cinema left. It's called the Coronet Century, and it stands on the site of what was originally the old Century Cinema. Both the Century Cinema and the Odeon were opened within months of each other in 1936. And at one time, the Century Cinema, which is the one that's still open down the road there, that had one of the famous Compton organs in there, and it was a great night out to go to the pictures because you not only saw the films, you also had somebody playing the organ for you, and on occasions you also had a stage show. So if you're two bob or whatever it was, you had a fabulous night out at the pictures.
That's right. And we're now coming up to the site of the Riggs Retreat, which was one of the many concert places in Clacton, entertainment centre of the past. Now just a car park.
And over the back there, we can just see the back of the Westcliff Theatre one of the oldest theatres in Clacton, and the showplace of Graham and Bentley, who actually had a marquee on the site when they first started entertaining, but they built a theatre, and their names are commemorated in a plaque above the proscenium arch of the stage, which is GB intertwined with leaves over the proscenium arch on the stage. Beautiful, beautiful old theatre.
That is in fact where Stanley Holloway made his debut, in the theatre there, having come up from the beach at Clacton into the theatre, which was a summer theatre. This is Wash Lane, and Reg, you know a bit about Wash Lane, don't you?
Yes, it leads down to the Wash Gap, and a lot of the building materials were brought from London to the Wash Gap here by barge, and then hauled by horses off the barges up here and built the houses of Clacton. That's how the building material was brought to Clacton, through the Wash Lane here, through the Wash Gap and up the Wash Lane.
And just at the bottom of Wash Lane we are coming onto the Butlin site, Butlin's holiday camp, which was in Clacton many, many years, now unfortunately closed, taken over, and Atlas Park opened on the site. That went bust, and now I understand it's in the process of being sold again for residential and leisure development, and it's hoped to incorporate a museum on the site somewhere. But this is Butlin's holiday camp that was.
And of course this was built in 1938. It's also been the home of many famous entertainers. Roy Hudd, for instance, was a redcoat here at Butlin's, and also Dick Emery has appeared here. Charlie Drake was here as a redcoat, and I was looking at a picture yesterday of Gert and Daisy. Now that's Elsie and Doris Waters, who were the sisters of Jack Warner, who was a comedian, and Elsie and Doris Waters, or Gert and Daisy as they were known on stage, they made a broadcast from here in Butlin's in 1959.
I think one thing worth mentioning is that Charlie Drake was on the bill many years ago, and its last season Charlie Drake's son was the entertainment manager for Atlas Park before it closed. So Charlie opened it and his son closed it, I would think.
These seats are damn good in here, no?
Was it New York or Peru?
I thought she didn't remember that bit.
Well, now I do. Where I first laid eyes on you. Or was it down at Butlin's by the sea? Was it Skegness, Clacton, or Filey? Was it April, June, or July? Remember, we met at Butlin's, you were the guy.
Amusements on the right hand side are going to be changed into a leisure centre. So they've been amusements for a long, long time, and just had all the equipment sold off by auction only the other day, and it's going to be turned into a leisure centre to try and get Clacton back to its former glories. And just coming up on the left hand side, Reg will tell you all about, I'm sure, the old Palace Theatre. Now the site has been taken over as an extension to Clacton Hospital, but just on this site was the Clacton Palace Theatre.
Yes, this was built in the 1890s. It was a grand scheme actually. It was supposed to be the Palace Leisure Centre of the past, because it was more or less a theme centre. They had a theatre here. They also had a skating rink. They had a Chinese pagoda. They had an Italian ice cream place. It was a marvellous place. But Bob and I were chiefly interested in the theatre, and in the early days of the theatre here at the Palace, I was looking at a programme, and they produced a play here, and they had in it three gentlemen who were later to become theatrical knights. That was Sir Cedric Hardwicke, Sir Laurence Olivier, and who was the other one? Forgotten him. I'll come back to him in a minute. But they appeared here when they were just ordinary struggling actors, and they went on to great things. What do you know about the Palace then, young friend over there?
More than you, really. It was supposed to be Clacton's crowning glory. It was modelled on all the Earl's Courts exhibitions, the Edwardian period, and it had all these sort of things like the blue grotto and Neapolitan pergola and Japanese pagoda and all this sort of thing in there. But it was quite successful, but it was so expensive to keep up that it just went broke after a couple of years. That was the problem. It cost too much, and it just became a theatre and cinema, really.
At the rear of it was the bandstand, the Clacton bandstand originally, until it was moved to the band pavilion site near the Clacton Pier. But that was the original outdoor bandstand at the rear of the Palace Theatre, where you could go and listen to all the military bands, etc. making music.
The third night, mate. Sir Ralph Richardson. Yeah, that was him. They were the 3 nights who appeared in a play there, and of course Larry Olivier was just a young man in those days, and he was thrilled to appear with these 2 elderly to him, they were probably only in their 30s, actors who, funny that the 3 of them all went on to become theatrical knights. On the left here is one of the Martello Towers. These were built actually to keep Napoleon at bay at the time of the Napoleonic Wars, and if anybody's good at history they'll tell me the dates of those. But they usually had these round towers which were more or less forts, and then they had a battery of guns in front of them. I'm right there. My brother here is more of a military man than I. What do you think, Martin?
I'm sure you're right about the battery of guns, but I don't know a lot about the Martello Towers. It's just that the one we have here we'd like to get hold of and turn it into a museum.
The guns fell over the cliff at some point, didn't they?
Yeah,
they were here, and because of the erosion on this coast, they just fell over the cliff at some point.
But coming more up to date and looking at the Beaumont Hall Hotel as it was, which is next door to the Martello Tower, that is now an old people's home. Used to be a very thriving hotel just prior and just after the war. But that, during the war, was the headquarters of the 16th Holding Battalion, I believe, Reg.
Well, actually, the 16th practice camp, which was an light anti-aircraft firing camp, where most of the soldiers were stationed in Butlin's camp. And you can imagine in the winter living in Butlin chalets. But all along that Greensward there we've just come to, there was a line of about 10 anti-aircraft guns, and there used to be planes flying up and down, towing the target sleeve, and these guns were firing away all day, practicing firing at the aircraft.
Dad did that.
Yeah.
It was stationed here in the
That's right. It's funny, isn't it? And another big school near here, they had St Monica's, they had the Beaumont Hall Hotel as an admin headquarters. In fact, most of these hotels along the seafront here were taken over by the military during the war, and it took them a couple of years after the war, of course, to get them back into shape again.
That Beaumont Hall used to be famous before the war for all its tennis courts and croquet lawns and all sorts of things. There were all sorts of sports facilities there. It was a really big hotel.
I think we must remember that they can knock the buildings down and take the places away, but we've still got our sunshine record and our 7 miles of beaches, and if we should really be making use of that and turning it back into a day tripper's paradise. We should just go ahead on that strength, I think.